Frankie, how's it going?
Pretty good. Adjusting to this way of communicating a little bit. Having some technical difficulties, but I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, good. I was talking with a student. I just had my afternoon appointments, and she's someone who's interested in law school. And so we were having some of those early conversations, and just thinking ahead to this conversation with you, realized how long ago you were in that seat as a first year student at the University of Miami, and not necessarily interested in law school at that time. But that's how it goes, right?
Yeah.
So now that we have some audience here, thank you everyone for joining us. Frankie, let's get started with a little bit of an introduction. If you could just kind of tell those who are with us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what you're up to, and then we'll kind of go back and work our way through.
Sure. I guess just in broad strokes, I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. Went to University of Miami for undergrad. Bounced around a bit in terms of what I wanted to study, but ended up graduating in 2019 with a degree in Africana Studies and Political Science. And then I went straight to law school the next year, and now I'm in my third year at Yale.
Awesome. So I wanna try to keep the theme of this conversation sort of you reflecting on some of the pivotal decisions you've made at different points. Because when I think to those who might be watching, whether they're current undergrads or maybe prospective students, we're all in the midst of making pivotal decisions, especially at your age and an undergrad. So talk about that first comment. You came to the University of Miami, but talk about your college decision making process. What was that like for you?
Yeah. Looking back on it, I had no idea what I was doing. I think I just Miami came onto my radar because my sister-in-law had gone there. Her and her twin sister both. And that was how I heard about it for the first time as or I guess not heard about it, but that was where I considered it as a real option for me for the first time. And I think at the end of my decision-making process, I was really deciding between Miami and University of Maryland, but both of my older siblings had gone to Maryland. I'd spent my whole life in my hometown and thought that, going somewhere else for school would be a good way to sort of change things up, try something new. And once I found out that I had been offered the Hammond Scholarship, I think that sort of made the decision a lot easier, just knowing that in addition to the scholarship money, I would have the kind of supports in place that would guide me as I was figuring out these decisions that would, set me on course for my life after school.
So where were you at sort of in terms of your ambitions and goals? What were you thinking at that time, senior in high school, looking at colleges? What did you see for yourself in the future?
Yeah, I wanted to be an English teacher, a high school English teacher. I think that I was sort of motivated by a lot of the same things that I'm still motivated by, but had sort of channeled them into a different avenue, I guess is the best way to say it. I thought that the best thing I could do would be to use whatever skills and expertise is too strong of a word in hindsight, but expertise I had to help other people improve their lives and improve the world around them. And I think at that time, the skills that I had were doing well in English class and being good at reading and writing. And so I thought that, the best way to sort of pay it forward, I guess, would be to go and be a teacher myself.
And how do you think about your own evolution in college? Because I'll share with you that one of the most exciting things for me about doing what I do for a living is really rooted in my own experience of growing up a whole lot in college and having my view of the world expand tremendously in college and taking these courses that challenge me in different ways. So I really like being a part of that for others. But what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I don't know, I sort of alluded to this a little bit at the beginning, but I didn't stay an education major for that long. I switched, I think, maybe 3 or 4 times. I know English and education at one point, and then maybe just English and maybe just political science. I don't really remember, but I think I was sort of in a constant state of like uncertainty for the first couple of years of school. And it was a little bit unsettling as that was happening, but I think in hindsight, I'm really glad that it went the way that it did, just because I think that you know, as I learned more and as I had sort of more freedom to set the course for my own education, both in class and like in the things that I was reading outside of class and the people that I was getting to know, it sort of gave me a chance to reflect on the life I had lived so far and the sort of factors outside of my own decision making that had shaped that life, and I guess gotten me to the place where I was. And so I think, I don't know, uh, to say that I was like having existential crises is like a very dramatic way of putting what I'm trying to get at. But I think the feeling of just, learning something new and then having that be such a big piece of information that you have to reevaluate everything that you think about what you want to do with your life was an experience that I had at least a handful of times in college. And I think a lot of that came through the kind of material I was being exposed to through Africana Studies courses and just like doing my own reading. I think that sort of branch of my education forced me to do a lot of that reconsidering and reevaluating.
Okay. So you mentioned the courses, you mentioned the program, the Africana Studies program. What were some, without getting too in the weeds, what were a couple of classes that maybe stand out for you as pivotal, things that were sort of like, started to really question or challenge you in new ways?
Yeah. I can't remember the title of it. I took my first Africana Studies class spring of my freshman year, and then that one was mostly literature, so it was just a lot of memoirs from Black authors from the 19th and 20th century, I think, which was an interesting foray, but didn't really, I don't know, ignite anything for me other than maybe like putting me onto that discipline as an interesting thing to study. Then I remember my fall of sophomore year, I took a class that was about the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think more than just studying that movement as like an impressive feat of mobilization and like organizing, I think it was helpful because honestly, it was helpful because my professor would just go on these long rants that alluded to a lot of things I didn't know and hadn't read. And I think just being in that environment kind of pushed me to, want to understand all this context and know what he was talking about. And so that's when I started reading a lot of like radical Black political thought from like decades before. And I think reading a lot of that stuff is, I guess, what set the spark for me to do some of the reconsidering I was talking about in response to your last question about, the forces outside of my control that had shaped my environment growing up and had determined what my neighborhood would look like and what kind of schools I would go to, and obviously the same for everyone else who was around me. And I started to sort of see myself as this one person in a very long and complicated history, as opposed to just like, I'm a college student and I want to go learn how to be an English teacher. I started to understand the like social and political and historical context that I was existing in, and that I think was a really important revelation for me because it changed what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
Mm. So that presented a dilemma for you in terms of maybe you knew kind of the direction you wanted to move and what type of impact you'd want to make, but then there's the question of how. So I think we'll kind of, I don't want to leave that there. I want to come right back to it, but before we kind of move to how you transitioned out of UM, talk a little bit more about your experience there. So Two things. What were some engagements and involvements that were really impactful for you on campus? And then also, how did you spend your summers in undergrad?
Yeah. In terms of on-campus things, I spent a lot of my time working in MSA, the Multicultural Students Association, and I did a couple programs that were sort of focused on diversity education for incoming freshmen, and then after that, sort of stayed in that office as an employee doing similar things, but not necessarily only for orientation. So it was a lot of like developing different programs around, um, I guess, diversity and inclusion, but also just, I think, the understanding the importance and the impact of um, race and the ways that having that understanding of the impact race has on our individual lives and our experiences at college, at any university, I think, but in Miami specifically, um, was important for working your way through a 4-year college. And I guess if I could like distill it into one sentence, I would say that I was focused on trying to um, provide some like real world context for all of the stuff that we were learning in class and trying to give people a place where they could, um, see some of the things that they were studying interacting with their own lives in a way that wasn't just here's something that's happening in this book and you can read about it and try to form your own connections, but here are programs where you can come and talk to your peers about them and sort of form your own conclusions that way rather than just taking in what you're being asked to read for class.
I get that. Yeah, that makes sense.
And
And how
then,
about, so one thing we talk about with students a lot is what to do with your summers, how much to push, how to get involved, what to do. So how did you spend your summers?
yeah, um, one summer I was at the National Education Association in DC. That was maybe obviously while I was still thinking about teaching as a career. Um, and I was in their education policy department. And then the summer after that, I was in Miami and I was working with a professor doing research on interactions between police and houseless people in Miami. And then the summer after that, I was at the Urban Institute in DC doing a internship in the Justice Policy Center, which is like the part of their organization that does all of the research on criminal justice and things related to it.
Okay, cool. And then so your junior year was a pretty big one. You took the spring semester and you went over to Paris through the U Paris program. So shout out to Professor Connors and Study Abroad program at UM. And that was I remember that being a pretty big experience. First of all, I missed you a lot. I missed not having you on campus. But I knew you were doing great things over there and you kind of came back with some clarity as I remember it. So talk a little bit about your experience abroad and how that made you start to see sort of the how that we talked about before, how you would make your impact going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's funny that you say that you miss me because I remember you being one of many people who talked me into going on that that semester abroad. Um, but yeah, I think just having a chance to step away from my life at the University of Miami for an extended period of time and kind of reevaluate some of the ways I was spending my time was really helpful. Um, a lot of the stuff that I was just talking about in response to your last question with MSA um, took a lot of time. And I think I don't regret that I did it because I think it was useful for me and hopefully it was useful for other people. But I think being both geographically very far removed and also like completely out of the university world for a while was helpful for me in terms of, thinking about whether how I was spending my time was really having the impact that I wanted it to have. Um, and I think I was still, before I left, thinking largely in terms of like you know, education is the best way to change people's minds, and all of these structures and systems that are in place and exerting downward pressure on people and creating all of these unfair outcomes, they could be changed if we just like gave people enough information to have them change their minds. And I think, I don't know that there's any experience that I had during that study abroad that really like gave me the clarity to, I don't know, stop believing that. But I think just being away from the university setting and seeing how small and how like context specific the things that I was concerned about was really illuminating. And I think it sort of goes back to the concept I was talking about earlier about understanding myself as like one part of a very big like world and story. I think it's very easy in college to get caught up in like managing all of your to-dos and clubs and involvements and things. And it took stepping back in a really dramatic way to recognize that, maybe all of these extracurricular clubs aren't just the like formative life-changing experiences that I am treating them as. And maybe I need to sort of, do some bigger picture thinking about where I want to fit in this story. And I think it was actually the summer after my study abroad where I think all of the like decision points about what I wanted to do after school started coming, because like I said earlier, I was at the Urban Institute doing this policy research internship. And I think at that time in my college career, I was sort of sure about grad school, but not sure if I wanted to do law school or some kind of public policy program. And I think being in a place that was focused on public policy research and sort of seeing how data focused it was made me realize that what I appreciated about, or what I like wanted to do with whatever work I decided I was going to focus on, was be close to people and be like meeting them where they are and helping them improve their lives as they wanted to, not as whatever government authority or other like large powerful body I was turning the information over to saw as the best way for them to improve their lives. And so I think that like interpersonal human element of like social change work felt like it was lacking in that my exposure to that line of work. And I think that having that sort of experience right on the heels of being away for several months and sort of getting the more like the space to sort of think bigger picture, those two experiences together, I think were helpful for me in figuring out what I wanted to do.
So you come back from Paris. I remember that decision-making point where things started to kind of fall into place and you had some direction as to what you wanted to do next. Do I remember right that you spent much of that summer studying and preparing for the LSAT and into the fall, and then you took the test sometime in the fall, right?
Yeah, I took the test in November. So I think I started studying maybe like at the beginning of the semester. So I guess like mid to late August of 2018. And then, yeah, kept studying until the end of November or middle of November. I don't remember when the test was, but sometime in November.
And you took the test once, or did you take it a second time?
Just the one time.
Okay. So then, so obviously, in my view, the LSAT's sort of one of those tests that puts you in a lane in terms of what types of schools you should seriously be considering or applying for or be competitive for. Tell me a little bit about how that worked out for you. So, how you identified the schools you were applying to, how many schools, any of that information, especially for the students that are watching who, are in your spot right now.
Yeah, I think it honestly all happened pretty fast. I think until the beginning of that semester, all I knew was that I wanted to go to law school. I didn't really have any idea where or what kind of schools I'd be applying to. And I had a conversation with law professor. Actually, I'm pretty sure you put us in contact like a couple of years before, Professor Copeland in the law school at Miami. Um, and we just sat down and talked about what I wanted to do. And he was asking me a bunch of questions about what I had done in school and what my grades are like and all these things. Um, and he was the one who told me that, based on what you told me, you should be applying to like these kind of schools. And I had no idea. I was just like, it'd be fun to be in a major city, and I want to be on the East Coast somewhere kind of close to home. Um, and so I think in talking to him, I realized that, maybe I could get into these fancier schools. Um, and so I think I applied to 8 or so schools, thinking that, I would send in the applications, and then if I got in somewhere I wanted to go, I would go. And if not, I would wait and try for the next cycle. Um, and I think one thing that was sort of stressful, just like from a logistical standpoint, is that the application cycle goes like late fall into the spring of next year. And so I had already done like, you know, 80% of the stuff I needed to do by the time I took the test. And so I was like, I really hope this works. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to have to like rewrite all these personal statements and essays and everything, because I didn't get the LSAT score I wanted. And honestly still felt some of that after I got my score back, because it, like, looking at whatever information I had access to from the school websites or admissions offices or whatever, I wasn't super confident in my LSAT score based on the scores that I was seeing on the other like medians or averages or whatever. And I guess my attitude was sort of just like, you know, it's worth a shot. I've already put in all this work. We'll see what happens.
Okay. So, man, you said something that reminded me. Oh, I wanted to ask about a gap year. Did you ever think about taking a gap year? That's another thing. A lot of students, most undergraduate students, are reluctant to want to do a gap year. But many students I talk to who are alumni and have been out of school for a few years look back and say they see the value of a gap year. How did you think about it then, and how do you view a gap year now?
Yeah. I think at the time I saw sort of like two tracks for myself. One was I'll get into a school that I want to go to, and then I'll go to law school right away. And the other was, you know, I won't have heard anything by January, February of next year, and I'll start applying for jobs and work for a bit, and then I'll go back to school. Um, I think at the time, I, of those two paths, preferred going straight to law school just because I wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. I think that when I was applying, and even now, I think that I think of law school as sort of something I have to do the job I want to do. You know, it's hard to be a public defender without a law degree, so I had to get it, and figured the sooner I could get it, the better. And now I still feel that way for the most part. I think there have definitely been times where I see what the value in taking time off to work would have been. Just in that, you know, there are spaces in school where I feel inexperienced or young by comparison just to my peers. So, you know, there's definitely value in like getting some work experience before for that reason. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm going to graduate, and I'll still have a long time to figure out what I want to do. I think that I would feel a little bit more pressure as I was making career decisions if I was a little bit older. Whereas now, if I do something for, even if I do like a job for 5 or 6 years and don't love it, I think that making a career pivot at 31 seems like a different thing to me than making it at like 36, 37.
Right. Would you say that most of your peers, or just from what you've seen at Yale overall, do most people go straight in from undergrad, or do most people do something else and then arrive at law school?
No, most people I think take somewhere between 1 and 3 years off. I think that's like sort of the average figure. But I mean, I know people who have done everything from straight through to like 6 years of working and then come back to school. And then on the other extreme, there are people who have had like entire other careers and then decide they want to be a lawyer and come back to school much later in their lives. So really a
Yeah.
broad spectrum.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's helpful for our students. Let's talk a little bit about law school. How would you compare sort of your expectations going to what the experience has been?
Um, I think my expectations were that it would be extremely challenging and uh, exhausting and stressful and all of those scary words that you hear associated with law school. And some of that is true. I mean, it is stressful and it is challenging, but not, I think, in the ways that I thought it would be. Um, I know that when I was coming into school, a lot of things that I'd heard were like, oh, it's cutthroat, it's super competitive, everyone's tearing each other down all the time, and you're in the library 80 hours a week just doing all this reading for class, you never get to sleep, all this stuff. And that just hasn't been my experience at all. And I don't know if that's because, I think it's partially because of the curriculum here. I think that compared to a lot of other schools, we have a good amount of freedom in terms of the classes we can take. Um, and the first semester, all of our classes were credit fail, so that takes a lot of the pressure off as you sort of like get used to how to be a law student. So that's one factor. And then I think another one is the kind of work that I want to do after school. Um, it, my sense is that for public defense work, and for a lot of public interest work, I think having like, you know, gaining experience in whatever field you want to get into is as important as getting really good grades. So I think for me, the stresses and the difficulties I had came from working in a clinical setting at school and just like having to deal with like clients' cases, and much less about, stressing about exams or writing papers or things like that.
Okay. So we talked earlier about some sort of light bulb moment in undergrad, and maybe those moments where things change for you and you start looking at things differently. Have you had any of those, and could you describe them in law school?
Yeah, I don't know that I had sort of like a light bulb moment in the same way as I did in college, only because I think um, I was I was starting from like this amount of information in college and like sort of narrowing it down to law school, and now I think I came into law school with with that level of specificity about what I wanted to do. Um, but I do think that I've kind of had what's the word? I've developed clarity in the same way, if just not like just like that. I think I came in sort of unsure of exactly how I was going to make this change, but like sure that I needed to spend my life making some kind of change in the way that our country does criminal justice. Um, and I think I had a lot of back and forth for the first year of law school, but really all of law school, about what the sort of best entry point was for me to try to make that change. Um, and I remember many times just sort of like sitting and being very frustrated by not knowing like what the perfect career path was to do that, and sort of weighing the pros and cons of doing direct service work where I'm working with one person at a time and basically mitigating damage, but not really doing anything sort of structural to change the way things are set up, versus doing something more like policy oriented or like structural change oriented. Um, and then sort of getting caught up in that world and not being able to, you know, interact with any real people or like understand the needs of the people that I'm trying to serve through this policy work avenue. Um, and so I think, that sort of back and forth is something I struggled with a lot, and where I've come out now, and I guess I can only attribute it to like the the different professions or the different like professional paths I've seen people take, um, is that I think that this is certainly an oversimplification, but I think that doing something is better than doing nothing. And I think that a lot of my sort of like discontent was coming from like a place of uncertainty and not knowing where I wanted to fit in or like start doing this work. Um, but I've come to realize that if I could sit and like ponder and try to decide what the best entry point would be forever, or I could start doing something now that is making a tangible difference in a real way. And I think that I have started to understand the value of that a lot more over the last couple of years, just from seeing sort of the shortcomings of trying to change everything all at once.
So what does that look like for you now? I mean, you're in your third year, your last semester, I think, and you'll be ready to take your next step and transition. So what does that look like for you? How will you make those changes?
Yeah, well, next year I'm moving to DC. I'm doing this fellowship program that's 2 years at the criminal justice clinics at Georgetown Law School. The first year is essentially public defense work. I'll be trying cases, and then the second year is half that, and then half clinical supervision of the law students who are working in their clinics. So people who are in pretty similar positions to the one I'm in now. I'll just be balancing my time doing those two things. And then after that, I plan to just go to a public defender's office somewhere. Probably I'll stay on the East Coast, but I don't know where yet.
Okay, cool. For those of you who are still with us, if you have any questions for Frankie, you can drop them in the chat there in the comments, or you can click request to join on the bottom right of your screen, and we can bring you on and you can chat with Frankie for a few moments. Maybe while we wait for that, Frankie, do you have any general sort of advice for the many law school or aspiring law school students that I work with here at the University of Miami, kids who want to go to law school as their next move? What would you say, or maybe a couple things that jump out at you that they really need to keep in mind or be ready for? Anything at all?
Yeah, I guess the most general one is just that, there's not a single path that you need to take to get there. I think I remember hearing a lot when I was like a sophomore or junior in college that you had to be a philosophy major, or like you had to take certain political science classes if you wanted to go to law school, or all these things. And that isn't true. I mean, I think that there are, a lot of people who have backgrounds in some kind of policy at this school, but it's not everybody. And I think that I personally can say that I don't think I would have ended up here if I had sort of tried to follow whatever path I was told would get me here. I think I would have been really unhappy if I was a philosophy major and like taking all of those classes in undergrad and spending all of my time kind of prepping for the next thing.
Well, hey, come on, let's not knock philosophy, okay?
Yeah, no, that's not a dig. I just meant, it's not for me. If I was doing something for the sake of doing it, I think I would have been unhappy, whether it was philosophy or anything else. And so I think that I wasn't always sure that like doing the things I wanted to do with kind of not a lot of regard for whether they would be beneficial or not. I wasn't sure that was going to work out, but looking back, I'm glad that I did it that way, because I was able to enjoy college and still end up where I wanted to be. So I guess, I don't know. You don't have to follow a prescribed path. I don't think it works that way.
Mm. Well, I like the fact that you sort of shared that you wrestled with a little bit of that uncertainty, and you were able to kind of step away from the original plan, even though you didn't know what the new plan would be. This is back when you were thinking maybe I should do something other than teach, because I deal with that with a lot of students. A lot of our students change courses, and I think especially when you're a high achieving student, it's very uncomfortable to sort of step out into the unknown and not be sure of what your next steps will be, or even what you're working towards. So I think hearing you talk about that, talking about sort of following your interests and your passions and letting the story unfold before you, while being active about keeping your eyes open and asking yourself questions and talking to people, a picture starts to take shape. And so I think it's valuable that you shared that today.
Yeah, happy to. I find myself reflecting on these decisions even years after them. So always happy to talk about it.
Frankie, I don't think we had any questions come through. At least I didn't see any in the chat, and no requests to come on. But fortunately, this conversation gets to live on our Instagram, maybe forever. so students can refer back to it later on. I do want to share, I'm a little disappointed that you didn't announce your candidacy for the presidency of 2036. This is
Never gonna happen.
It's a topic I won't stop pressing. I'll be an active voter, and I know who I like to cast my vote for. So
Okay, well, I'll let you know. Don't hold your breath.
Frankie, it's always fun chatting with you. Thanks for being sort of the guinea pig to come on and do the IG live. But it's great to hear from you. We're always very proud of you, and thanks for sort of sharing some of your experience at the U, shouting out MSA and study abroad, and a lot of the great things that sort of helped give shape to your experience. But yeah, it's always great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
We'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, Frankie.
Bye.